All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. Thank you, both of you, for being with us. My name is Julia. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm on the events team here at Books Are Magic. Before we get started, I do just want to share a few quick logistics for tonight. First off, we do ask that you keep your mask on throughout the event. At the end of the conversation, we're going to be doing a hand-raised audience Q&A, so start thinking of questions to ask and then hang on to them. At the very end of the talk tonight, Rebecca is going to be signing and personalizing books at the desk all the way at the back of the store, and we'll have additional books available to purchase up at the front where you came in. If you're joining us virtually on the YouTube live stream, of which there are many of you already, we'd love to encourage you to also buy a copy of the Seaplane on Final Approach, and you can use the link in the live stream description to do so. All right, with all of that in mind, I'm very excited to introduce tonight Rebecca Rukeyser and Carmen Maria Machado, who are here celebrating the release of Rebecca's new book, The Seaplane on Final Approach. The Seaplane on Final Approach takes place at the imagined Lavender Island Wilderness Lodge, situated on an Alaskan island reachable only by boat or seaplane, and a place that's perfectly claustrophobic. The story centers on Stu and Maureen, the lodge owners whose marriage is failing, as well as Mira, a young woman working at the lodge and interested in creating a theory of sleaze. This book is lusty, and it's funny, and it's absolutely original, and I really love in particular what Rachel has to say about Seaplane. She says, "The Seaplane on Final Approach perfectly telegraphs the suspended animation of tourist trap life within an eerie, life-changing season, the gravity of which will only be felt decades later." I promise you'll love every moment of this wonderfully strange story, and I'm so excited to be celebrating it with you all tonight. Rebecca is the recipient of the inaugural Berlin Senate Department of Culture grant for non-German literature. Her fiction has appeared in such publications as Zizova, the Massachusetts Review, and Best American Non-Required Reading. She received her MFA from the Iowa Writers Workshop and teaches fiction writing in Berlin. And Rebecca is joined in conversation tonight by Carmen Maria Machado. Carmen is the author of the best-selling memoir In the Dream House and the award-winning short story collection Her Body and Other Parties. She has been a finalist for the National Book Award and the winner of the Bard Fiction Prize, the Lambda Literary Award for Lesbian Fiction, and the National Book Critics Circle's John Leonard Prize, among others. So without further ado, everyone please give a very warm welcome to Rebecca and Carmen.
I'm going to start out by reading for about 4 to 5 minutes. So I'm starting sort of in the middle, but this gives you a little backstory into the protagonist, whose name is Mira, and the obsession that really drives her through this novel. I had been to the Kodiak archipelago before. The previous year, I had been sent to spend the summer with my marvelous aunt. My aunt, when she explained where she lived, would make her hand into a map of Alaska. You make a fist, and then stretch out your index finger and thumb. Your index finger becomes the Aleutian chain. Let me see if I can do this. Your index finger becomes the Aleutian chain. Fingertip west, stretching into the Bering Sea. And your thumb becomes the Alaskan panhandle, thumb south, stretching towards Vancouver. Where she lived was just below the second Where she lived, right below the second knuckle of the index finger on the Kodiak archipelago. I'm actually done. I was sent to my aunt's cabin because it was thought that Alaska would correct me. My parents thought I was wayward because my grades were poor, and even though I was a junior in high school, I still had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I had no drive. But I hadn't really dabbled in delinquency. I had never gotten it quite right. I bought the wrong hoodie, etc. So I was being sent away from the yellow California summer for being dissolute when I had only committed the crime of being interested in the dissolute. I was focused almost wholly on the subject of sleaze. What was sleazy? I didn't quite know, but I studied everything for traces of it. Sleaze had something to do with sex, something to do with danger, but it also had something to do with other, more occluded aspects of adulthood. I couldn't define sleaze. I couldn't anticipate sleaze, but I could identify it. Places like dive bars exuded it, but it could also occur in sterile environments. Sometimes even in Starbucks. There would be a man with a particular paunch that strained his shirt in a beguiling way, or a woman tottering in cork heels. Then even the cranberries in the scones would twinkle with sleaze. I knew sleaze had something to do with excess, and because of that, I wanted very, very much of it. I approached the subject with a taxonomist dedication. I made lists of sleazy things and things that other people thought were sleazy but weren't, like cold weather, as opposed to hot weather, was sleazy, because the streets were empty and there was more privacy. Cleavage was sleazy, but breasts were themselves not necessarily sleazy. Big rigs were sleazy, but so were four-door sedans. I made these lists when I should have been studying. I failed French. I was lost in a complicated maze of my own fashioning. Almost 17, still biting my nails down to nubbins as I cataloged. The word sleaze doesn't come up often when you're teaching English as a foreign language. I've only had students ask for its definition a few times, usually because someone on some forum has called someone else a sleazebag or said, "Take it sleazy." When asked directly, I've made that elaborate shrug that communicates that I am not a dictionary, the definition can be looked up. But that's not exactly true. When I see students Googling, finding pictures of wide lapels and 5 o'clock shadow, I have the sensation of a drawstring being yanked closed. That's not all sleaze is, but I can't fully explain about sleaze. I can't write on the whiteboard. Fruit candy fed into female mouths and colored Christmas lights out of season are both sleazy. Sleaze can't exist without proximity to danger. People believe Florida is the sleaziest state, but they are wrong. It is Alaska.
So in addition to questions at the end, I also invite you to imagine things that may or may not be sleazy, and to ask Rebecca what her position is on the relative sleaziness of things that you can think of. I also have several in a list, so we're going to be figuring out if certain things are sleazy or not sleazy. Excellent. Hi, everybody. So, this is a novel about many things: naivete, adolescence, power, control. Can you talk a little bit about your relationship with being a teenager and writing a novel about a person on the cusp of adulthood who, as an adult reading it, you're like, there's so much fear that I have for this character. And I feel like the whole time I'm like, oh no, oh honey, oh no, like that feeling you have when you talk to somebody who's like 17, 18 years old. So can you talk a little bit about like, you know, that moment of life, like writing a novel that is a coming of age story, you know, that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, is it on? Yes, okay. I mean, I think that fear that you were saying that you feel when you're talking to someone that's maybe 17, 18, maybe a little messy, I think that fear doesn't just exist from the outside. When I was myself a slightly messy teenager, I remember that fear. I remember that acutely, and I remember it being, you know, a sense of haunting that was with me a lot as I existed in my teenage self, as I thought about the life that I wanted to become, the who I wanted to become, the life I wanted, and you know, the steps that it would take to get there. So one of the things that happens in this book is the character has this like shortcut idea, an idea of like, okay, well, you know, this is my way towards adulthood. This is my way into myself. I'm gonna do this, and it is a fail-safe plan. Nothing could possibly go wrong with the plan that I've concocted for myself.
Do you want to tell them what the plan is?
Yeah. Okay. So the plan, it has something to do with sleaze. The narrator is sent to Alaska to sort of like get herself in order. You know, find some sort of drive or direction in life. And instead she sees this guy who is the embodiment of everything perfectly sleazy, an Alaskan fisherman. And then she's like, all right, cool. Like, I found sleaze incarnate. It's time to torpedo my life and flunk out of school, and then I'll just go to Alaska. And there it is. There's my future. It's gorgeous. And I've found like a 3-step, you know, plan to achieve it. It doesn't work out.
Sorry. I also feel like there's something in this novel. I mean, it's obviously so much about Alaska because you yourself worked in Alaska. Yes. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I mean, there's so much in here about like the frontier and God's own country, and this like obviously like deeply sort of, you know, colonialist like mindset in which like stories are kind of constantly invented. People can invent themselves like out in this, you know, untamed wilderness.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about your time in Alaska and I guess why that landscape captured your attention in the way that, you know, you get to like dedicate an entire novel to it?
I mean, the landscape itself is just undeniable. It's just profoundly beautiful, and I was moved by that as a young person working seasonally in Alaska. As I was working in a cannery on Kodiak Island, where this novel is set, and as a commercial fisherman, and also in hospitality. And that was the thing that really struck me, was that you tell someone that you're working commercial salmon fishing or in a cannery, and they're like, oh, that's probably rough, right? And what I found was actually the hospitality was the most grueling, which anyone who has worked in hospitality knows full well, right? And part of it had to do with the narrative that you're sort of peddling in hospitality. You're like, oh, welcome to Alaska. It's the best. It's pristine. All good things happen here. We have wild animals. We have wild plants. We have wildness for everything. And repeating that over and over again in the claustrophobia of a hospitality job is remarkable. I mean, in that I like remarked on it because there's such a gulf between being like, anything could happen here, and being like, man, I've told people that anything could happen in this state like 10 times in the last 2 days. So I think that had a lot to do with it. And I don't know, another thing that I think of when I think of Alaska and what interests me about the juxtaposition that exists in Alaska has to do with when a friend of mine an Alaskan, met me in California, and we watched the Simpsons movie. And there's a part where, like, Homer has torpedoed everyone's life and is like, okay, well, I have a plan. What's the one place you can go to where you can have, you know, you can be a total dirtbag with a criminal record and no one cares? Alaska! And my friend came out of this movie and was like, wait, I thought everyone thought that we were the last frontier. And just remembering, like, the gulf between the narrative, the gulf between the myth and the other myth is, yeah, impressive.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk about your erotic aesthetic theory of sleaze, or I should say Mira's erotic aesthetic theory of sleaze, but also maybe yours. And the way that it sort of drives this novel. I mean, I feel like, you know, there's something really, I always love when we get to have, like, insight into, like female erotic, like, that is the drive, right? And the entire novel is sort of along this thread of, like, her increasingly feverish masturbatory fantasies about Ed and the life she wants to lead with Ed, and sort of these, like, what is it that sort of made that story, like, why is that the backbone of this novel? Like, what are your sort of thoughts and feelings about that as a subject? Just sleaze in general.
That's a lot. I mean, I think, it's really fun to write that. I mean, it's just a lot of fun. The other thing is that also is its own sort of, like, narrativizing or mythologizing. Like, you know, the idea of thinking about, like, this idealized narrative of Alaska and the idealized narrative of, like, the guy that you really want to bone. Like, I really liked that idea, that those weren't that's not that dissimilar.
Yeah.
Like, idealizing is idealizing. And I also wanted, I was really interested in the idea of staying within a young woman's head for the fantasy. And, like, chasing her thoughts through the fantasy and allowing her and her fantasizing to be a source of agency in the book, rather than, like, zooming out from someone fantasizing and be like, and this is what she was doing, or, like, this is what the sensations were, just staying in her head and thinking about sleaze.
I mean, there are moments of zooming out too, because I mean, another thing that I love in this book is how there are these brief moments where, like, for the majority of the book, we are in her, like, contemporary, like, POV of, like, she's 17, 18, like, that, you know, but every so often it's like, we get these little glimpses in the future where she's like, you know, many years from now when, like, XYZ happens, like, many years from now, and, like, so we are getting these, like, beautiful little drifts into the future where we are sort of triangulating her experiences, and we're seeing her through the eyes of, like, an older self, but it's still her. It's just, like, you know, it's like that older self. I don't know, I found those parts actually really moving and really beautiful, because they were also, like, rendered, I think, so compassionately, which I think can be really hard. I don't know, when I think back to my young self, like, who I was at 17, I feel like I'm very, can be really hard on her sometimes, and so there's something really beautiful about just, like, the sort of compassion with which you were able to, like, move between those perspectives, I think.
Well, I mean, I think you're not that dissimilar. One is not that dissimilar from who you are when you were 17. And there's also something that I wanted to work with, where the now of the novel, the stuff that takes place at the lodge, sort of sticks her, and the events are something that she keeps going back to even years later. And when you're sort of trapped like that, I guess you have to have extra compassion for your young silly self.
Yeah, I don't know, I feel like also, I mean, on this theme of just, like, adolescence, it also sort of reminded me of the way that she wanted to, like, self-define her time, where she was, okay, I'm gonna, like, work the summer, I'm gonna make this money, I'm gonna move to Kodiak, I'm gonna find Ed. I'm gonna like fuck Ed. Like she has this like very clear plan that's like, again, like how could it possibly go wrong? Bulletproof, like very simple. But it also reminded me how like when I was a kid, like I remember having fantasies because I read a lot of boarding school novels, and I was like, oh, my whole life, everyone's not, yeah, you all understand. Where you're like everything would be solved if I could simply leave my home and go be a pretend adult somewhere else where my parents were not like breathing down my neck constantly. And I feel like that sense of just like, I guess it was just like a frontier desire, right? It's like a desire to create your life and be like, I'm gonna like define my life and define who I am in this really like intense way. And there was something about that just felt so like there's just a real beauty to it. I know it's not really a question, it's just a statement, but it just reminded me. I kept thinking about all my boarding. And I'd ask my parents, I'd be like, "Can I go to boarding school?" They'd be like, "No, what are you talking about?"
Can I go to boarding school in 1912?
Right, exactly.
Can I be an orphan?
Okay, I want to ask you about. I'm gonna ask you if certain things are sleazy or not. I made a little list here. Okay. Combination washer dryers.
I mean, I don't think it's someone who has made the choice to get a combination washer dryer. Speaking as someone who has made the choice to get a combination.
But the thing itself, not the person who owns it.
The thing itself. Well, I mean, I think one important thing about sleaze is that it has to sort of be doing a lot of things at once, which washer dryers certainly, it's in the name.
Yeah, they're like a little bit like
and it sort of fails at both things.
Yeah,
at once.
exactly.
but badly.
Right.
Precisely, like the socks are still brown and damp at the end of it.
So is that a yes?
I don't know, let's get it like 35% sleep.
Oh, okay, percentages, great.
Okay.
Okay.
What have I done?
Templeton the Rat from Charlotte's Web.
This is a loaded question because has heard me hold forth on Templeton the Rat from Charlotte's Web as the ideal sleazy children's book character. Templeton the Rat has unbridled appetites and is like kind of a con artist, if I remember. Like
he has that like heavy Jersey accent. Right? Am I making that up? No, he's like a heavy Jersey accent.
I just remember that perfect Garth Williams illustration of him with like where he's just like eating a bunch of pig food. I don't know, and it's just like fat and happy and like just looks pleased with life. Yeah.
So was he like 100% sleaze?
Yeah.
Okay. So he's 100% combination wash dryer, 35%. Yeah. Berlin. The city where Rebecca lives, to be clear. It was like in Pole, Berlin. Yeah.
Oh, now I've done the percentage thing. I would say Berlin is a little sleazy, but Berlin is not as sleazy as Vienna. Is the statement that I'm going to make, because I think Berlin is a notoriously permissive city, and I think something that sleaze requires to exist fully and sleazily is like there has to be someone standing back and being like, ooh, no, you don't do that. And Berlin is not a place where you have a lot of people, at least about like sort of like raucous, sensual things. Got it. Doing it.
Okay. Planetariums.
I mean, in that you can like make out in the corner of them. Yeah.
Or whatever.
I don't think outer space is sleazy. But
not outer space, planetariums. I'm just trying to say that, right? Because sorry, may I?
Yeah.
Okay, so I have made out a lot of planetariums, but I do feel like planetariums because it's like space, but it's like being projected up and it's like a weird little dome, and then when it's off and you just see it's like this weird little dome, and you're like, oh, it's not the infinity of space, it's just a gray dome. Right? And like the way the chairs kind of lay back like a little too far. Right?
I think sleaze is in the eye of the beholder.
Okay, I'm gonna say planetariums are 79%.
I like that as a percentage.
Okay. Novelty souvenir cups.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah. Like, but bonus if they like come pre-chipped.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
yeah.
And it was like if the straw is really squeaky.
Oh.
I feel like the squeakiness of the straw is also like if you give it a squeak and it has that like long like it sounds like something's being like killed. Like I feel like that's also like.
I think I was thinking more mug than
I was thinking of
like,
those the big sips with like it says like I grew up in downtown Dorney Park and Wildwater Kingdom on the outside, and then there's like a little squeaky straw in the middle.
Generally, like the bigger the drink receptacle, I think that the higher the sleaze factor.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. All right, great. Sleaziest Sesame Street character.
I mean, like no, like sometimes it's just obvious. It's Oscar the Grouch. So you don't always have to dig for it. Like
Sure.
it's right there. There's.
Okay, the sleaziest food or drink.
Is Oscar the Grouch Templeton? Are they related?
Because Templeton is self-satisfied, Oscar the Grouch is really pessimistic. They have like an opposite like worldview, I feel.
That just seems like a sibling. I don't know.
Like they're just like related to each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think you're. Yeah, I mean
They both like trash.
They do. They do love trash. And they're happy to be in
It's
trash.
something to ponder.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sleaziest food or drink.
Oh yeah, Twizzlers.
Is it because of the hole in the middle? Because you can turn it into a straw and suck things through it. Theoretically.
There's like the in Clueless at one point she's talking about like the ideal food is something that draws attention to your mouth, and I think this is true also for sleaze. But I think, and maybe this is the fact that I just saw Crimes of the Future, but the fact that Twizzler, when you're eating a Twizzler, your body feels like this is plastic. Like don't eat the non-food. Is also a component.
I feel like also the gesture of like flipping a Twizzler into your mouth and like pulling on it is like a simultaneous, like it's like a sleazy gesture. Like flip pull, like it just doesn't make any sense. It's just like a food shouldn't be able to. Right?
No, it's a non-food food.
Got it. What is the sleaziest literary genre?
I want to say something just sort of like perverse, like military history. The novel, probably the novel.
Interesting.
I don't know. It's not a genre, but like any,
No.
Yeah.
I mean, but that's not fiction. That's the novel, like specifically the novel.
I need to think about
Okay.
this more. This is gonna take hours of my life.
We have now moved into also the Q&A portion. So if anyone either has questions or wants to suggest an alternate sleazy of any of these categories, please. Any questions? I can also keep.
But Templeton the Rat stays.
Yeah,
That's non-negotiable.
What's the sleaziest fabric?
Seersucker. But only.
All right.
But only if it's a dress.
Only if it's
Like a summer dress made out of seersucker, I think.
It's very thin.
It's also called I think because we were talking about Twizzlers, the sucker part in seersucker is, yeah.
Yeah. Did I see a question up here? Did you have the question? No? I thought I did. No? Okay. What is the sleaziest decade?
All of them? All of them. You would think it's the 1970s.
I would have said the aughts. I would have said like the 2000s. That's what I would have said.
Because of indie sleaze.
Yes.
No, I think sleaze could exist, through space and time and planetariums.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes, in the back right there.
Can you talk about how you got fascinated with sleaze in the first place and whether working on this book has changed your views in any strong way?
So the question for the online folks is, when did Rebecca first started being interested in sleaze, and has working on the book influenced her thoughts on sleaze in any way?
So, the book started as something totally different. It started as an experiment with a Western. And one of the things that I had one summer where I just sort of went, Western mad and just went through the genre. And I was noticing that one hallmark of the Western, like, you know, is a young guy who's like on a quest, like single-minded, the young man in Go West Young Man guy who's like, I'm gonna go out, and he has these ideas about purity, and it's all like, I mean, it's a deeply problematic issue every single time, and I was just thinking, okay, what is the opposite of that? Like, let's get like someone thinking like, oh, I want to find like the ideal of what a man can be on a horse. It just happens over and over again. And I wanted a young woman with some competing like lodestar. And so I was like, okay, what honestly would happen if you had a protagonist who was like, yeah, sleaze, that's what I want to find out about. But yeah, that sort of like brought me into it, and my interest in the subject has not dimmed.
Do you feel like it's sharpened or like become refined by your own sort of pursuit of it in narrative form?
I think that refinement and sleaze are not good bedfellows. I think it's gotten more omnivorous and diffuse, and it's grown tentacles.
Mm-hmm.
That's what. Yeah.
Is there another question? Yes, right here. Yeah, you. Yeah.
I have two. Are fruit bats sleazy, and is Australia sleazy?
Are fruit bats sleazy and Australia sleazy?
Oh wow. Australia. I'm gonna go ahead and say yes. Yeah, absolutely. You know, just blanket statement about an entire continent.
No, I feel like sort of by definition, right? Because it's just like, because I feel like all those narratives, like I feel like, I don't know, like watching like The Picnic at Hanging Rock or something, and it's just like colonialists.
I
like,
think they're
white,
all wearing
like,
they're all wearing seersucker.
Yeah, they are all wearing seersucker, and there's like white people like just in this like landscape that wants to like kill them fucking dead, and they're like, let's have tea at the base of this haunted ass mountain.
What could happen?
What could possibly happen? And it's like, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I think that's correct. That feels correct to me.
Fruit bats. I mean, I love them. They are my favorite animal. I think a fruit bat is not sleazy. A fruit bat eating a Twizzler is sleazy.
Other question? Yes, right there.
Did you know you were going to write about Alaska or set something in Alaska while you were there, or is it something you came back to after you had already been there?
So the question is, did you know? Sorry, this is just for the only people. Did you know that you were going to write about Alaska while you were there, or did it take a while to figure that out?
It took forever. Yeah, it took a long time. I think that like one of the things that helped me land on that as like a location and a subject had to do with me leaving the US and moving to Germany. And there's a particular German fascination with the American West. It is a favored holiday destination, and I'm from California, and by virtue of that fact, and the fact that I'm from part of California that isn't like beaches, it's like gold panning, I was finding myself sort of like a representative of the American West in a weird way, and at parties, and I'd get questions about it in a way I couldn't answer these, right? And it just made me think back about like the idea of the West, and the fact that, you know, the Alaska, the state motto is the last frontier. Like it's very embedded in that mythology, and I kept just going back to it. And I had a lot of memories, so.
Any other questions? Oh my goodness. Yes, in the orange.
What was the hardest part of the book to write?
What was the hardest part of the book to write?
I think the fact that I did it hopelessly out of order and then played like a terrible prolonged game of Tetris with like 27 word document. It's called like novel 1, novel question mark, novel end. And I like, I mean, this is the closest I feel like I came to living like cliche of novelist, which was a source of like satisfaction, that I like printed everything out and actually cut it up and was like, I don't know, like an Edward Gorey character just surrounded by it, taping things together. And I wish I hadn't done that. And then someone's like, why don't you try Scrivener? And I was like, no, I found my way. I found my way and this is it.
Other questions? I saw other hands. Yes, right here in the green.
Do you think that you have to have inhabited a place in order to properly write about it?
Do you think you have to have inhabited a place to be able to fully write about it?
No, I don't. For this novel, because it's so very much a first-person narrator, and I felt like I didn't want to imagine a place that I didn't already know to be like haunted by my like silly younger self. Like it was just much easier to remember the places that I had done kind of stupid things and thought stupid thoughts, and like that was my way into it. And I really like thinking about places and doing the thing where you like close your eyes and sort of like wander around a place from your past. And I think that like my nostalgia for something that is, you know, markedly different from what happens in the novel, but allowed me to write something more nostalgic. But in general, no.
Yes.
I would love to hear you talk a little bit about your revision process, particularly like maybe what surprised you in revising or what you learned about the characters, and if you wouldn't mind, like whether there was a particular piece of feedback either from like an editor or a friend reader that really changed something about how you understood the novel, what you wanted it to be.
So the question is about the process of revision of this novel.
There's so much. There's so much, but because it's you, Leslie, asking the question, I want to bring up Michelle Hunovan and a piece of advice that I got many years ago in Michelle Hunovan's workshop, which had to do about like writing the sensuous and writing sensuality and like sex. And it was one of those like lovingly deployed anecdotes where I was just like, oh man, I understand. And it was just, I had written a sex scene and she was like, so this reminds me of like someone that I knew who wrote a sex scene, and he was talking about the process of writing the sex scene. He said like, oh, what I do is I like light a bunch of candles and I wear a velvet robe and then it just comes to me. And she said something like, I don't know, is like, is that the best way? And it was perfect. And I just kept thinking back on that and being like, whoa, how many scented candles and like velour robes am I employing right now? And like, let's move that back. Yeah.
That is, I can just hear
It's so good.
Other questions? Can you talk a little bit about the work, the other writers and the other books that you feel like this book is in conversation with?
I mean, I think the things that I was reading when I wrote this, there was like the stack of the westerns that I had read and was like, we want to sort of take a segue from that. And then I'm really, at the same time, I started getting really into like mid-century English women and this particular sensibility that like I find like is something that like Muriel Spark and Barbara Pym and Elizabeth Taylor all have in common, which is just sort of a judgment. They are judging. They are judging, and and you realize when you're reading that does not come at the expense of empathy at all. Their characters are judging each other with sort of like a laser eye and a razor tongue, but they're able to do that in a way that's more human and not flattening. Yeah, I think so. Then I was just doing it with 2 stacks of books, and one was like a bunch of westerns, and one was a bunch of like Elizabeth Taylor everything.
Mira is so judgy. I actually she's so judgmental, and like there's this like, I mean, I mentioned earlier like the moments where she would sort of go forward in time, and there's this moment where she's like looking at Maureen, who's like this middle-aged woman who is everything's kind of falling apart. And she says, like, many years later, I would, like, recognize, like, these little physical gestures she's doing. And there's this, like, beautiful passage about, like, being an adult and, like, taking pleasure in, like, sort of small moments. And then she's like, but right now she just looked pathetic. Right? so she's like, it's like, you recognize that, like, one day she will recognize, like, what it is to be, like, in distress and, like, trying to comfort yourself with, like, I forget, it's, like, a cup of tea or something like that. But then she's like, but right now she's just, like, judging the shit out of her. Like, she just looks sad and weird. And it is really, like, such a clear, like, the judgment of youth, I think.
Which is terrifying.
Mm-hmm,
yeah,
mm-hmm,
even,
mm-hmm.
I mean, at the time, and, just gets more so day by day.
So, any other questions? Rebecca, what's next for you? What are you working on now?
I'm working on a nonfiction project, and then also a novel about a political sex scandal that occurred in colonial Williamsburg on the eve of revolution, and is sordid, and everyone's wearing wigs and unwashed. And
so deeply sleazy.
Having a really good time with this. Oh, maybe I'm sorry. Let me amend. The sleaziest decade is the 1770s.
You heard it here, folks. Sleaziest decade, 1770s. So the 70s, but just not. Just the previous 70s. Yeah. Great. Awesome. Any other questions? Any other random last thoughts on sleaze? Yo, yes.
I have a question for you on sleaze. This is gonna sound reductive. I don't mean it to be. Do you see sleaze as like a good thing or a bad thing?
Do you see sleaze as a good thing or a bad thing?
The thing is that neither, right? I think it really exists in a great state of limbo where like it is no one's gonna be like, oh, that's sleazy, therefore like my grandma would give it 2 thumbs up. But I don't think that like sleaze is also just truly terrible. I think the example that I was thinking of before was in terms of a person who would be deemed sleazy, like a hardened criminal, like a serial killer is not sleazy. Like a con man is sleazy, but someone whose like reputation is like unimpeachable is also not sleazy. Like it's somewhere like it's a little between, which is what makes it like delicious.
Right. It's like hot, right? Which is what makes, right? Yes. Which is what makes, but also like hot is not a judgment, right? It's hot isn't necessarily good or bad. Like hot's just hot, right? Anyone who's had a crush on somebody where you're like, I don't know what's going on with that crush, and like I probably should not have it. You understand what I mean, right? It's not good or bad.
Exactly that is the crush where you're like, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's not like the the perfect features and like tailored clothes of my beloved. That's not sleazy. It's the one where you're like, oh no.
All right, so your crush, possibly sleazy. Think about it.
Hopefully.
Hopefully your crush is sleazy. Awesome, wonderful. Okay, thanks so much, everybody. Thank you for coming. See you on our final approach.
Last words for me. Again, want to thank you all for being here. So lovely to be in a room full of people. excited about this book. As a reminder, Rebecca is going to be signing at that back desk over there, but let's give her a beat to get settled, and then you can start lining up. We do have, as a reminder, additional copies of the Seaplane on Final Approach at the front where you checked in, as well as signed copies of both of Carmen's books. For those still with us on YouTube, that link is in the video description. And if you're in store with us, we do ask that once you purchase your copies, you do start to head downstairs so our staff can break down the space. That's all from me, so thank you again, everyone, and let's give these two one more round of applause.